Hello my friends and welcome back to my channel. Today we have our Sunday Mish-Mash, where by and large I'm going to try to breeze through this. But I wanted to start off by talking about something that I saw on Matthew from Mayberry Book Club's channel recently. He posited the age-old desert island question in the form of books, giving a consideration to if you were going to be deserted on a desert island and you could take 3 books with you, what 3 books would you take? And he gives a lot of thought, really, really interesting answers. And I've done a lot of thinking myself on it. And I'm going to exclude the obvious. The obvious would be I would take the Bible. You could mine that for your entire life and walk away with new things every time. Whether you're a believer or not, you can get a richness out of it. It's got variety, it's got depth, it's got just so much packed in there. In fact, if you picked 3 books, you could do far, far worse than picking a translation of the Bible, an exhaustive commentary on the Old Testament and an exhaustive commentary on the New Testament, and have that be your 3, and you would be just set for a absolute richness for your entire stay. But I wanted to set that one aside as this is the obvious one. I don't like going the route of the obvious. That's not nearly as fun for me. So I think only one of my picks here will be unsurprising of the 3. And so we'll start with the least surprising of them. There is no doubt in my mind that if you are looking for something and you're not looking at taking your favorite books, you need to give careful consideration to the 3 that you're picking, because if you're stuck on this desert island, say for a year, it may not be a big issue. But if you're stuck there for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and all you have are these 3 books to read and reread and reread and reread time and time again, you want something that gives you variety and depth and wealth. You wouldn't want to, for instance, pick a fantasy trilogy, because it would get old after a while. It would run its course. So you want something that gives you variety and length. And this offers both, and that would be Shakespeare, his complete works. This is my Riverside Shakespeare, which has all of what he's written in here, along with really good introductions, and it's got little footnotes in here. So it's a very good volume. This or the Norton Shakespeare has caught my eye, or if it would be allowed to take single volumes of his complete works, something like the Arden Shakespeare, which is supposed to be really good. I still haven't picked up one of them yet to verify this, but I hear that the Arden Shakespeare's got really good information as well as some additions in there after the play that kind of expands on it. And so Shakespeare would be the obvious first answer of what you would want to take with you, because you've got so many plays across multiple genres. You've got comedies, you've got tragedies, you've got historical plays, so you've got variety in there, in addition to just the variety in the characters from play to play. And that doesn't even begin to look at his poetry as well. So it's just all wonderful. You can richly mine that for ages. The next thing I would consider would be I would want to have something medieval with me, because my comfort read, in addition to Tolkien, would be very much in medieval. And so I would want to give strong consideration to the medieval and just the richness of the literature that was composed in the era before Shakespeare, starting with Beowulf and moving up. And so something along the lines of, and I haven't settled on a definitive volume that I would take, but my thoughts run along the line of something like the Norton Anthology for the Middle Ages, which has a lot in here. In 400 pages, you've got excerpts of Beowulf, or you've got all of Beowulf, you've got some Bede, you've got Dream of the Rood, you've got Wanderer, Battle of Malden, some of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, you've got some Geoffrey and Monmouth, you've got some Layman, you got Marie de France, Chaucer. I mean, you've got all kinds of stuff in here, in small doses. I would prefer something that was more complete and having more of those in longer excerpts. And again, if you're looking at making it as a count as one, doing something like the entire Norton anthology of English literature line, because this is volume 1A. If you could take all of it as one, then you could do far, far worse than something like that, because then you could take everything from the Middle Ages on forward and have just a very big trove of things that you could mine. So something like this, but I would want something much bigger. And I have something that kind of fits, being my Cambridge Old English reader. You can see this is quite a bit bigger than this volume. And the problem with this one is that it is all of the texts are in Old English. I am not making good headway on learning Old English, but it does have chapters at the beginning where you would learn it, and as a desert island thing to do, you could do far worse than having a hobby, where you could sit down with this, teach yourself a language, and then be able to read and translate everything that follows. And it's got a lot that follows after that you could really enjoy. It's got some of the laws of the Anglo-Saxon kings. It's got some of Bede. It's got some of the battles. It's got some psalms from Alfred. It's got Seafarer, Dream of the Rood, Battle of Malden. It's got some of Beowulf, some riddles. I mean, it's got some really, really good stuff in here. And so that would be my next inline kind of pick, would be something like this, something medieval that would have that. And the reason why I wouldn't want to go with something like just Beowulf, Beowulf being my favorite of the medieval text, but I know Beowulf really, really well. It already occupies a lot of headspace right here. So while the temptation would be to pick a favorite book like Beowulf, it's both a short read. I could read that daily if I had that kind of time. And eventually it would start to wear and not be as exciting, especially, there's only so much you can explore in there. And since I already know it well, I wouldn't want to necessarily take that. So that leads us to the third pick, and you would expect Tolkien to appear here. And you're wrong. Because just like Beowulf, it already occupies a lot of headspace. I don't need to take The Hobbit with me. I know The Hobbit really, really well. I don't need to take The Lord of the Rings with me. I know The Lord of the Rings really well. I don't even need to take The Silmarillion with me, although that would be a very, very close contender, because I know it pretty well by now, the overall overarching thrust of it. If I were going, I would want to take something that, again, has variety and depth and infinite rereadability. And so my thought goes to short stories right now, because I am absolutely loving science fiction short stories. And so my first inclination was that I would pick up something like this Norton Book of Science Fiction, which is edited by Ursula K. Le Guin and Brian Atterbury. And then I started looking into this. I ran into an issue with this volume. See, Michael from Fit to Be Read and Steve Donoghue both did a video where they talked about their top 10 science fiction short stories, as well as a couple of honorable mentions. Do you want to know how many of the almost 30 stories that they mentioned are in this volume? 0. I was very disappointed in that. I thought for sure I would have those, but I don't. I checked my other anthologies, thinking that surely I'd have to have some of these somewhere. I've got a couple of Isaac Asimov books that are chock full of his short stories, and none. The only story that they mentioned, I believe I have a copy of on my shelf, is Sound of Thunder by Ray Bradbury. And that's only because I've got a lot of Ray Bradbury. But it's not in this book. But the other night, I was at a local library and kind of browsing a little bit to kill a little bit of time before I had to be somewhere. And a volume jumped out at me. It was a big, giant anthology. It was, I think, something along the lines of the Big Book of Science Fiction. And it was packed full, 1,200 pages of short stories. Nothing but short stories from science fiction. And I grabbed it, and I started flipping through, and it had some of those. The Last Question by Isaac Asimov. Repent, Harlequin, said the TikTok Man by Harlan Ellison. Sound of Thunder by Ray Bradbury. And I was looking through it. I'm like, okay, from the ones I can recognize from memory, there's at least half of them that are in this volume. I want this volume. And so if I was given the ability to buy one book when I hit the 50 mark on my 100-book challenge, it would probably be the book that I'd want to pick up, because I want to read those stories that were mentioned by Steve and by Michael. And I don't have any of them handy, and it's driving me insane. Yes, I could go online and find them, but I've got lots and lots of stories on my shelf that I want to read. Why would I sit there staring at a screen to do that? So that would be my choice. I'll have a link to it on Amazon down below, because I think it's an absolutely great volume. So if you're interested in science fiction short stories and you want a good volume, it seems like this is going to be the one to have on your shelf. If you had nothing else for science fiction short stories, this would be the one. And with 1,200 pages, that's a lot of readability. That isn't quite as thick as that full Shakespeare, but it's close. So I appreciate Matthew and his posing that question and offering, anybody else that wants to, think about it, feel free to do so. So I'm going to pull the Steve Donoghue. I'm going to weaponize this. I'm going to turn this into a tag and say that I would love to hear all of your answers. So I'm going to tag 3 people to get this started. I'm going to tag Steve Donoghue because he whined and complained about nobody tagging him in the Canterbury Tales tag. And rightfully so. I mean, Canterbury Tales is fantastic. You can't go wrong with that. So, Steve, you're tagged to let's hear your 3 choices for Desert Island. I'm going to tag Michael K. Vaughan because I can't do anything without Michael joining in, and vice versa. And so I want to hear his answers because he's got just such a wealth of knowledge. And then I'm going to tag Tom from LA Books because I think he would have some outstanding thought and answers to it. And of course, we know Dante's going with him, but what would the other 2 be? But maybe like me, he might say, well, I already know Dante really well. It would stick with me. Even if I didn't bring it with me, I would remember it. I'd be able to enjoy it and revisit it. So I don't need to take it with me. And so there you have that. The next thing I wanted to talk about, I've been enjoying my March of the Poems with the Poems of the English Language from Harold Bloom. I'm marching my way through 1 poet a day and having a blast. I don't know that I'll continue making the videos after March ends. And that leads me to ideas that I've had. I've started, Leslie from the Nerdy Narrative has been reading a short story a day and posting about it on her Instagram, and then is talking about it on her channel now. And she's doing, she just kicked off her first of the short story Saturdays. And that got me to thinking, I've got a ton of short stories, and most of the time when we're looking at our shelves of what we should pick up to read, we're looking at novels, not short stories or anthologies. But I'm enjoying. For a couple of days now, I've read a short story a day around the time that I'm reading my poem a day, and using that to kick off my mornings, and absolutely loving it. This morning, I read One More for the Road from Ray Bradbury, and it was just fantastic. So what I've started doing is I'm pulling my short stories and putting them into a spreadsheet and going to use a random number generator, which is what I did with what I had already put in there to come up with the story out of here that I was going to read. And pulling that together to where each day, each night, I'll hit that random number generator, pull the volume associated with that story, and then the next morning I'll read that story, and I'll post about a little bit about it on Instagram then that next day. And I think starting in April, I'm going to try to do every Saturday, theoretically, where I talk about both the poems and the short stories, or essays, because I'm going to put short stories and essays and novelettes and novellas all in this one lump group. And I'll talk about them in a video just for the short form stuff that I'm reading each and every week. Because I think that's absolutely fascinating to do. And I have so much that I would like to explore. And I've been enjoying it. So I'm going to be doing short story showers in April to bring Ray flowers in May. So what I'm going to be doing is the completely random from my whole collection. In April, I'll be doing a short story a day. And then in May, I'm going to focus specifically on Ray Bradbury. I'm going to read 31 different Ray Bradbury stories. Because Ray Bradbury is just fantastic. He's one of my favorite authors. And you know, taking that little rhyme that we all learned as a kid, April showers bring May flowers, and you know, turning it into something unique like that, but it sounded fun. So that's my plan, and I'll continue marching through the poems as well, because I think it'll take me into June to get through that Bloom volume, going one poet at a time, and that seems like a really good pace for me. But after March ends, I'm not going to force myself to finish. So if the poet has 40 pages worth of stuff, you know, and I only get through the first poem or two, okay, you know, I'll pick them up the next day and keep going. And same with the short story things. If I happen across a short story that's 60 pages long, or a novelette that's 90 pages long, and it takes me 3 days to get through it all, that's okay. As long as I read a little bit from it each of those days, I'll be making my way through and chipping away at some of this short fiction alongside the longer stuff. And so that brings me to what I read this last week. So I finished 3 more books, and I finished them in the first, so on the 9th, I had finished 10 books. And then I decided I need to slow down a little bit. I don't want to keep up this pace. I don't want that kind of pressure to build up. And so I picked up a couple other volumes. So I'm currently reading 16 Ways to Defend a Walled City by K.J. Parker and Forever Peace by Joe Haldeman. I'm slowly working my way through those alongside with, you know, the short stories and the poems that I've been doing. And I'm also working my way through Starship Troopers by Robert Heinlein. So those are the ones that are still in the works. And then the 3 that I finished, in the order that I kind of finished them. Well, not in the order, but the first one I finished was St. Joan by George Bernard Shaw. This is a play about Joan of Arc. And it was interesting. It's not nearly as good as Shakespeare. That was my first impression upon reading it. Was, gosh, this highlights how good Shakespeare is. But it was really enjoyable still. I absolutely am fascinated with the figure of Joan of Arc. Want to read more about her, more of her, both in fictionalized form or nonfiction. She's just a person that has always interested me from history. Then I finished my 4th book out of here. I finished the Time Traveler, which was absolutely delightful. Possibly my favorite of the 4 that I've read out of here so far. I've got 2 more to go. The First Men in the Moon and The Food of the Gods. We'll see how soon I get to those, because those, you know, that it won't be long to be able to finish out that book and have finished all 6 H.G. Wells in less than a calendar year, in less than half a calendar year. And then the one that really surprised me, enough that I made a video on Tuesday all about it, because I didn't want to usurp Epic Comic Book Wednesday from Michael and Steve Donoghue, but I finished Northlanders by Brian Wood in a single day. I read it all of Monday. Made a video that Monday night to put up on Tuesday to talk about it because I just absolutely devoured this. This was such a great and enjoyable read. Really fast, but it's not small, but you'll have some pages where, it'll fly by quickly, and others where there's a lot more text. And this has 4 different, maybe 5. Yeah, 5 different tales in here of varying length. The shortest being what would have been 1 issue of a comic. There's one in there that would have been 2 issues. And there's one that I think would have been like 8 or 9 issues. And it pulls together all of these. And this is the first of 3 volumes. The second volume seems to be wildly out of print and extremely overpriced. My wife, after hearing how much I enjoyed it, called me while I was at work and she said, "I have to come clean with you." I'm like, okay. She apparently got this at Half Price Books for $50 or $60. I was like, but it says right on the back it's $29.99. I was like, so you didn't pay that? She's like, no, so it's probably like you can't get it. So I hopped on Amazon after that. And sure enough, on Amazon, Volume 1 is available now for $30. Volume 3 is available for $30. Volume 2 is not available. And if you look around online, it's anywhere from $70 to $120 for Volume 2. So I'll be patient. I'll be watching for Volume 2. Eventually pick up Volume 3. Because they aren't telling a chronological story. I don't see there being any issue getting Volume 3 before Volume 2 and reading that. But it also led me to go to my library, which is where I was and found that anthology. And my real purpose to go there was to look at the graphic novels. Because it got me wanting to pick up and check out ones like Saga, which I have heard incredible things about and know that it's one that I've wanted to read. And to look at the non-superhero, non-TV movie tie-in graphic novels and see what's out there. And so I picked up the first volume of Monstrous, the first volume of Saga, and the first volume of Why the Last Man, with the intent of reading an issue or 2 out of the first of the volumes to see if it's one that I would like to continue reading at some point in time in the future. And so I did read Monstrous, the very first issue of it, and it absolutely gripped me. That one definitely has won the right to want to be on my shelf. I am absolutely fascinated with it. I want to read more of it, and I'm going to eventually pick it up and get all of Monstrous for my shelf. But I do need to get back to Conan the Barbarian. I've read Volume 1, or Issue 1 out of this collection. It's got Elric of Melniboné in it. And so the next issue has Elric as well, and I still haven't picked that back up. I'll probably do that a little bit later today. I think I'm going to take it upstairs with me so that I make sure I get to Issue 2 in there at the very least. Because that's the other thing I've been reading. And so that's all I wanted to talk about. I wanted to kind of keep this short and sweet in spite of having the Desert Island books and whatnot. And I hope you have a great rest of your weekend. Thank you, BookTube.